Marianna, thank you so much for joining the Interfaith Voices podcast. I'm really interesting and fascinated to have this conversation with you today, but I don't really want to get ahead of myself because I want to give you the opportunity just to share a little bit about yourself. I've already read the bio, so everybody knows all of that. But why don't you share, whatever you feel is pertinent or that you want to share with our audience?
Of course, I'd love to. I'm Director of Communications for G20 Interfaith Forum. One of the things that we do is we try to bring policy and faith together. And we have a wonderful opportunity with the G20 Summit to be able to bring together our policy papers that are faith-based, and then we bring them to the G20 Sherpas for all of the G20 countries, which represents about 85% of the world's population. And so one of the things that I really enjoy about this organization is that we are able to really dive in deep to how faith and people of faith really do help and change the way we see policy and governments, and that we need to become involved. We're always kind of on the ground, right? People of faith are the ones that are helping individuals, helping the poor, the needy, the most vulnerable. And so it's important for us to be at the policy table as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And often that's not discussed all that much. A lot of times when we talk about faith, we do talk about the justice work that we do, the help work that we do, the aid that we provide. But sometimes when we talk about, civic engagement, policy, all of these type of things, I think the general population maybe struggles to put the two together. Would you agree with that? And I think that's part of the reason why the G20 summit is so important.
I do agree with that. And realize our G20 forum is an opportunity for faith and religious leaders to come together and talk about these policy areas. But before the forum, we have meetings together trying to talk and hammer out these policies. By the time we have the forum, the policy papers are set ready to go. And instead, what it is more is a discussion of what we've discussed for the whole year. And this year's an interesting one because G20 is being held here in the United States. And so basically the host country gets to pick the areas of emphasis, the policy areas that the G20 as a whole will be discussing. And so this year, the three areas that were picked by the United States government are first to advance pro-innovation policies to accelerate technology development and adoption. Specifically, that has to do with artificial intelligence, which is what we're going to be talking about today. The second is to deploy emerging technologies to drive economic growth and human flourishing. And third, it's this to strengthen manufacturing supply chains and skilled technology talent. So the three areas, we're talking artificial intelligence. We're also talking, deregulation also. And then the other one is to help economic growth throughout the world. So artificial intelligence, though, is the one that I've been most involved with in terms of the policy development and the white paper development.
So how does one how does a person find themselves at the intersection of faith and artificial intelligence like you've managed to find yourself?
Well, it's a kind of a little bit of a passion of mine. My husband has been involved in artificial intelligence for almost 50 years. So he started, first a lot in computational linguistics. He worked for Microsoft for, IBM research and then Microsoft research, working on, you've probably used Bing Translator. That's what he
Hmm.
helped develop at basically at Microsoft. And so I guess because of that, that has also been an interest and passion of mine. And then I am a lawyer, and also I have a doctorate in education. So that intersection of the law and policy, and I'm very concerned about our children. My husband and I, we have 12 children and 33 grandchildren. So children mean a lot to me. And that's another reason why I feel so strongly about AI, looking at the future of how it's going to affect our children.
Yeah, it'll take me a while to catch up. I just had my first grandchild just a couple weeks ago, so I think I've
Oh,
got a ways to go, but
congratulations.
it's an exciting time around our household for sure. And because of that, that's been a lot of I've got two children and they're both adults now, but now having this new grandbaby, it definitely grounds you and makes you think about things in a different way, much like when you had children for the first time. And when you think about things like artificial intelligence, technology, the future of faith and technology, usually there's always an undertone of that in my mind. I'm always thinking about, okay, what is my new little grandbaby going to be growing up in, and what's this world going to look like for him? And I don't know that I've got any concrete answers, but I think when we talk about the work that we're doing as well in these faith spaces, before we pushed record, I said, everybody's talking about artificial intelligence because of a lot of things going on in the world. Pretty much everybody's talking about faith, and there seems to be a resurgence in conversations and engagement in faith communities. But this is probably the first time that I've had a real conversation where we're going to meld those two things. And artificial intelligence, it's really it's challenging, right? Because I think we see the benefits of it, but the potential downside or the obvious downside is very clear as well in a lot of different ways. So I think there's there's excitement around artificial intelligence, and then there's trepidation around it as well. So how do we even begin this conversation with all of those kind of emotion? If I bring up the word artificial intelligence in one of my Zoom calls later today, it's just going to be an awkward feeling in the room because none of us are going to know kind of where to take it. So how do we even begin this conversation?
Well, I think the number one way to begin the conversation is to become informed and to make sure that we understand really what the problem is. So, we are bombarded by all of these sensational articles. I don't know, every single time I open up a newspaper, there's at least one thing, a new thing about artificial
Hmm.
intelligence, something. And oftentimes it's very doomsday, negative, all of those kinds of things. I have to admit, I see the balance between the two. We have to acknowledge that AI is here to stay. That artificial intelligence applications are a part of our life already. They're being used in banking. They're being used in so many areas of our life that we don't even realize how much is being used. But what we need to do, though, is become informed about where we should be careful in the use of AI and where we should become involved in making sure that it doesn't creep into human flourishing and human dignity. Now, I think we have to talk about the encyclical that just happened last week by Pope Leo, his document, his 80-page document. And I would say those that are listening, I don't care if you're Catholic, I'm not Catholic, but read the document because
Hmm.
what he's done is a wonderful for anybody who's a person of faith, going through and looking at it through the lens of human flourishing and human dignity. How are we going to, look at those two things in this new artificial intelligence world? And I think a couple of the things that are most important that I think come cut across in my white paper, I had the opportunity to basically interview and talk to, religious leaders in, 10 different religions. And there's not a lot in religions that oftentimes we come together on. You know what I'm saying? I mean, religions oftentimes have a lot of differing faiths and different beliefs. But I was surprised how many things all of these faiths have in common when it comes to artificial intelligence. And the number one thing is that we have a soul, that we are human, and there's a difference between humanity and artificial intelligence. And number one is we have to keep that separate, that, artificial intelligence does not have sentience. It will never become human. And we need to make sure that is completely separate. The other thing that is very much concern for most religious leaders is our youth. What's going to happen to the youth in terms of their education, in terms of their learning, but also in terms of relationships and the concerns about chatbots and, this idea of marrying an artificial intelligence. And all of these issues are a concern for the future of our future generations and families and relationships that are basic to our society. How is artificial intelligence going to affect that? It's already affected it. And what can we do as parents, grandparents, as people of faith to make sure that that doesn't hurt the rising generation? And I think we need to act really fast
Hmm.
or it is going to hurt. But the last thing I would say that's also a concern is religious freedom.
Hmm.
And a lot of these LLMs, large language models, have a lot of biases in them. And so if you go, whatever faith you are in, I would challenge you to go in and just query with an LLM, just a general query, what do you feel about, what does this religion believe in? And see what it comes up with. And you might be surprised how completely off it is because it's just dealing with what's generally out there. And there's a lot of negative written about people of faith and different religions. And so it's just taking everything, that's out there. And so that's another concern is this misinformation and biased information about people of faith and what we truly do believe. And so that's another, major concern. And that's when benchmark research is being, becoming a really big thing for religious people as well.
Yeah, oh, such strong points that you made there, and I'm thinking of specifically that last point, and the interfaith work that we do within my organization, it all is with that undertone because it's so easy in this technological world to get misinformation. I mean, we're even talking, we're doing a lot of work on the midterm elections here, and even with that, we're always really focused on making sure that we get trustworthy information out there because there's so much misinformation and disinformation, and that could have to do with politics, that could have to do with religion, and there's so many assumptions that are made. If I said, one religious group, the listener might have a set of assumptions about that group if they didn't have any sort of personal connection with them. And I could see that technology, artificial intelligence could even create a larger barrier if we're not careful. And I think, I'm thinking about when I was raising my children when they were still in my house, the general approach that I guess that we tried to take, and sometimes more successful than others, is not to say that technology and when my kids were growing, it was all about the smartphones were kind of the new thing, and social media was just starting to really become prevalent among younger people. And it wasn't necessarily the idea that stay away from it at all costs, because as you mentioned, social media, this is here, and it's, if anything, it's just going to expand and grow. We're not going to go back to the times when you and I grew up, Marianna. It's that we're not getting back there, but there's pieces of that will always recapture. And I think one of the things that faith does well is we do humanity well. We do meeting in person well. We do those pieces really well. So how do we separate the two, as you mentioned, and really respond appropriately to the rise of artificial intelligence and help teach our congregants, our friends, our family, and our kids just the appropriate way to do that? So let me give you maybe a hypothetical situation of just a parent. I'm thinking of my daughter now who's going to be raising this little one. How do we approach this first within our household? If both of us are parents, how do we approach this with our children?
So I'm so glad you asked that question because that's where I feel very strongly about it. I mean, we're talking governmental policy way up here,
Hmm.
but it's really, where the rubber meets the road. What are we going to do in our homes, in our families, and with these young people? The number one thing that I would say if I was talking to a parent is, first of all, make sure that you know what AI can do. There are all kinds of one of the recommendations that we have for people of faith and interfaith communities is there are a lot of curriculums that are being developed right now to help teach parents and people of faith what can they say to their children? What are some things that they should do to make sure that their children understand proper uses of AI and negative uses, uses that can be destructive for their education? Another thing I would say is I'm also a professor, and so I also teach, young people. I mean, they're 18 to, 25. And when I'm dealing with these children, it's been interesting, and I'm sorry, they're young adults. Um, they're still children to me. But when I'm teaching them, I've seen a marked difference in their writing and their ability to creatively think since the beginning of AI and LLMs being so readily available. And so I would say make sure that your children are not using LLMs to do their homework,
Hmm.
to have them academically struggle. That struggle is imperative for learning. And so just to put in their homework into AI, and AI can do homework really well. And so, bam, it's done. Yay, I did my homework. There's been no learning happening at all. And so I would say make sure that you talk to your children about that and say, yeah, you might not get an A, but that's okay. That's what we're doing. This is, we're learning, and part of learning is failure. And so one of the things that I used to do with my children, because they would get so anxious about getting something lower than an A, this perfectionism is such a part of our society now, that we would have a party when they got a bad grade because I would say, yay, you failed. That's wonderful. That's great. We're going to help you to do better next time, but you tried, and yeah, it was hard for you. That's okay. And so I think one of the things is to make sure that people, your children especially, feel like they can be imperfect. That's part of learning. And, AI will always give you the perfect answer, quote unquote. I will say one example I had that shows that that's not true was I just LLM asked a query, um, write me a 3-page paper about AI and faith and different faiths and what they think about AI. And it immediately generated me 3 pages. I read it through, and from my knowledge of faiths and people of faith and what they feel and religious leaders feel, it was completely wrong.
Hmm.
So I went back to AI and queried again, and I said, okay, I want you to show me, good research. I gave it very strict parameters. I said exactly where I wanted them to get the source from, from the source, from the religions itself, statements that they had said. And this was Claude, and Claude came back and apologized and specifically said, I am so sorry. My original document that I sent you was wrong. And after doing research, here's the new one. Now, for me, that's a perfect example of what we're talking about. If children think that AI is going to give them the correct answer all the time, they also need to be taught that it isn't right all the time.
Hmm.
It will give you biased answers. It will give you wrong answers. It will hallucinate. It will make your thinking fuzzy because you haven't done it. And so it takes away your creativity as well.
Yeah.
So some ideas, and I would say also help your children be creative. Enable them to have creative outlets. That is the antithesis of AI. And so the more creative they can be, get them outside, get them painting, drawing, doing something, acting on a stage, do something creative to get away from AI.
Yeah, and I think also just always encouraging our kids and each other, honestly, to be connecting in real relationship, to be out, like you said, go outside and play, go grab the neighbor friends. Sure, there's a place for technology. Sure, AI is going to be a part of our lives, but let's not let it replace the parts of our lives that need to be human, which are, those artistic pieces, those relational pieces. And I think maybe that's so taking this maybe one step outside of the home and maybe into our faith communities. there's a real fear, and I do hear it, and maybe again, maybe not so much in a faith context, because like I said, this is the first conversation about this that I've had in this context. But I do think there's a general worry that, you speak a lot about human dignity and meaningful relationships. And I think there's a fear that artificial intelligence is going to take us away from that. And of course, when we see the headlines, we'll hear these crazy stories about somebody creating a relationship with a chat box, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's this fear starting to be built up that this is going to take away our human dignity and our ability to have meaningful relationships. So how can faith and religion, let's take this higher. How can we as people of faith and as religious people inform our culture, inform policy, et cetera, about this in a way that really does preserve human dignity?
So there are six different ways right now that are happening to make sure that it does have human dignity as number one. The first one is this, and I mentioned this, is establishing benchmarks. And what this means is that religious groups evaluate how AI systems represent different faith traditions. And then what they do is they kind of help the model, they benchmark the model to go to the source, go to the religion. So if I just query and ask about, an evangelical, what do evangelicals feel about AI? Then what you're going to do with the benchmark is it's going to go straight to the evangelical site and get what they have said. But then it will ask again, do you want other sources? You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
So a benchmark helps basically when you make that query, it goes straight to the source, but then it also will say, do you want other ideas of what they think? Because we also have to be careful about making sure that people are able to get other sides of the story, right? That are also out there. So the number one thing is a lot of faith traditions are establishing these benchmarks and taking them to the LLMs and saying, when it comes to faith, we see that you're biased. These are benchmarks that you need to use to stop that bias. The second is passing legislation. And this is where great, grassroots, we can all become involved
Hmm.
to really help pass legislation at your state to be able to see what kinds of things can be put in. I know I'm in the state of Utah, and the state of Utah now has actually established an artificial intelligence office for artificial intelligence policy. And to be, come involved, any, person, citizen can become involved in this and really make a difference. It's amazing. One person can really make a difference in terms of making sure something gets passed. And amazing, and it's against things like deep fakes, making sure that that's a deep fake. There's also disclosure rules for your privacy that have been put into place legislatively for here in Utah, and then also things like mental health chatbots. There's been a lot of problems with mental health chatbots telling people the wrong thing.
Hmm.
And so those are just beginnings that you can become involved. A person, a citizen can help with that. And then, like I said, curriculum, read the curriculums, understand what AI really can and can't do. And then I would say too, put pressure on AI companies to make sure that they are truly designing things ethically. And finally, if when there's a harm done, and this kind of hurts me because this is what's really making a difference, is to take these systems to court.
Mm.
So, Anthropic, OpenAI, all of these companies have been taken to court mega thousands of times. Um, and that is causing them to think more, ethically about what they're doing because, they're getting billions of dollars settlements. And so, sorry, but money does talk. And
Hmm.
so, taking the court system for AI harms is another way that we can kind of curb things.
How do we, and taking us on a little bit of a left-hand turn here. Often when I bring up artificial intelligence or we're talking about it, there's an environmental concern. How do we address that as people of faith?
I'm so glad you said that. Right now, and I'm sure you might have seen it in the news that Utah, we're dealing with that right here in
Hmm.
in my home state, in that there's a big area in northern Utah where there are not a lot of people, but Utah has been in a decade-long drought.
Mm.
And this huge, I mean, we're talking like acres and acres, if not miles, of data center that's being wanted to put in this area. I mean, everybody's like, okay, you're taking our water and we're in a 10-year drought. How is that going to affect us? There's story after story of basically these data centers being put into areas where there's a lot of impoverished people. And so they have, easy access to land, but then they take the people's water and then the people don't have water for themselves.
Hmm.
And so it environmentally, yes, it is a huge concern. And the other concern is we are not sure the long-term effects environmental. And that worries me even more. It could be even worse than we can imagine what will happen to our water supply if we're using all of our water to take care of data centers rather than, portable water for us to drink and use. So there is definitely, and then of course there's the climate effect of the warming of the atmosphere that happens through data centers as well. We're already dealing with the greenhouse effect. We're already dealing with a warm climate, a warmer climate, which is affecting our weather throughout the world and also our water levels of the ocean. And so with these huge data centers, and I don't think people know how big they are, because oftentimes they're put into places where they're not people. And but these huge data centers they emit a lot of heat. So that's also going to be, something that's going to affect our climate as well.
Yeah, and same. We're here in Wisconsin, and we're dealing with the same thing of the large data centers. Going in more rural areas, and it's a hard thing, right? Because again, like we've already mentioned in this podcast, AI is going to be a part of the future, whether we like it or not, and all of us are deeply concerned about the environmental challenges that it's creating, and it's very local. You're experiencing it in Utah. We're experiencing it here in Wisconsin. There was just a community that voted down a data center in western Wisconsin just earlier this week or last week in Wisconsin, I know. And so again, this is another way. And Mariana and I don't have all of the answers, but we can say if this is happening in your state, in your community, get involved. Don't just watch it happen. Make sure that you inform yourself on. So if there's a data center coming in near you or in your state, figure out what that means. What are the challenges? What are the concerns? And then be involved. Be involved because ultimately, the people make the decisions. And so let's make sure that we're not allowing just the financial, health of the community be the only factor when these data centers are potentially being brought in.
Well, and Matt, I'm sure that you've seen this in your life, and I've definitely seen it in mine, that one person can make a huge difference.
That's right.
And if you are willing and able to just say, okay, I feel strongly about this, I'm going to do something about it, you might be surprised at how much you can do and change and make a difference. And so when it comes to AI, I am not a doomsayer. I mean, there's some people that are like, okay, AI has got to get out of here completely. We got to get rid of it. I do see, there's positive ways of using it. And so, but it needs to be done in an ethical, faith-based way. And I think that as people of faith, if we all kind of come together on this, important subject, especially when we think of the next generation. And that's one thing that people of faith, we are concerned about the next generation. And so I think we can, come together and say, all right, we're going to make sure AI is not a part. One thing in education, in terms of AI, that foundationally children need to, like I said, they need to
Hmm.
struggle. They need to have that opportunity. And so to limit the amount of AI use until they get to a point where they understand enough that they can look at an AI output and say, that's wrong.
Hmm.
That's incorrect. I know enough myself that I don't have to go with what I'm given, so I can distinguish between that. Like
Yes.
I said, I teach at a university. I teach writing. I teach, a secondary writing class for, seniors. And it's interesting. I'm coming to the point where I'm having them have paper and pencil.
Hmm.
You know what I'm
I've
saying?
heard of
So
educators do
not
that.
even
Yeah.
right. And and many of my students are like, wait a minute, we're seniors here at college and you're making us write. And I said, yes, because I want you to learn grammar and I want you to learn how to write a good sentence and logical flow and all those important things. And AI takes that away from you. So let's
Hmm.
get a piece of paper and a pencil.
Yeah, yeah. My youngest is actually over in England studying this semester creative writing, and they've been having to do a lot of the writing in class because they want it to be very authentic and very connected to the people that are there. And again, avoiding AI, I'm sure, is a piece of that as well. I'm thinking about there's so much going through my mind right now in this conversation, but as we think about the challenges with AI, connected with the reality that AI is just going to be a part of our future, we have to keep in mind that it's not about just saying this is bad. It's also coming together and figuring out, okay, what's a better solution? So if this is going to be harmful, if this part of AI, whether that's the environment, whether it's human connection, if that's not healthy, if that's not good, then how do we come together to come up with new solutions? And that's what I see as being such a benefit to something like the G20 Interfaith Forum. I mean, this is international, right? And
Right.
so, what is some of the work that you have been seeing done? I mean, because the event is in October, so you've been
October.
working on it already.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you're seeing?
Well, because like I said, October is the culmination
Hmm.
of our year journey, trying to figure this out. We've already met, specifically, we just last week, I was in Washington, D.C. with a bunch of other policy people all coming together and people of faith coming together and talking about what kinds of AI policies should we work on internationally, but also here. We've also been at the African Union, and the African Union is very concerned and worried about what kinds of AI policies should they implement. I'm also involved with the UN. The UN is having an AI governance summit that is happening the beginning of July, which I'll be involved in. And at that summit are people from all over the world coming together and talking about what should we do internationally because AI, because of the internet, anybody, it's not just here in the United States, but internationally, it's affecting the world. And so to also realize that I think sometimes third world countries are more understanding of the importance of policy and guardrails than maybe our country is. So because of that, that can be helpful in terms of a UN having an actual board, a standards board that would, come into place that would say, what are things, uses of AI that are positive for human flourishing, and what are ones that maybe we should especially restrict in terms of, children under 18. That these are things that people can't use. Because realize in our society, we do that already when it comes to movies. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
You can, if you're under this age, you can't go see in a movie theater. We already do that in some of the things. We also realize that that's important for the next generation. So this is just another thing we've already done, but probably more important than some of these other things in terms of making sure that our children are safe. And so realize it's an international concern. And that's the reason why, like I said, we're involved with the UN to also be a faith voice at the UN summit to be able to say, okay, as people of faith, we're also concerned about this and we want to be here to help.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. Such good insight. All right, I our time is coming to a close, and I know you are the expert in a lot of these spaces, and I respect that. But I want to turn it around a little bit. You've been a part of such important work, and specifically thinking about the G20 Interfaith Forum. And how long have you been involved with that, first off?
It's been about 7 years.
About 7 years. So
Yeah.
doing this work internationally with faith leaders from that represent faith traditions outside of your own, what are some of the things that you've learned going through this work on this level?
I think the number one thing that I've learned is that people of faith throughout the world all love other people. I've been so impressed with the way all faiths care about the most vulnerable. And I have seen that in refugee camps. I have seen that just recently. Like I said, I was in Baltimore for a Muslim, all of the Muslim nonprofits in the United States all met together at the Baltimore Convention Center just a week ago. 30,000 Muslims all coming together and all just talking about how can we help other people.
Hmm.
And so for me, it just gives me so much hope. We talk too much about divisiveness and how awful the world is and all these terrible things that are happening.
Mhm.
And so working with all these faith leaders gives me hope. So I
Yeah.
think that's the number one thing I get from the work that I do.
And isn't it true that now, I'm speaking here in America. I know you're speaking on more of an international front as well. But here in America, as things seem like they're increasingly challenging based on the environment that we're all living in here, I'm seeing more of a focus on faith, more of a focus on faith leaders. And I
Yeah.
think there's something to be said that, when things are difficult, that's when we tap even more into our faith. Maybe that shouldn't be the case, but it just is. And so I just appreciate your time, appreciate all of the work that you're doing. How can we stay connected to this work?
Well, please go to our website if you want to learn more. You can also read our policy papers on our website. If you're interested in, as most nonprofits, we're always love to have donations, love to have, financial help, but also more than that, we would love spiritual help, So I'm all about prayer and spiritual help for the work. I do think that that helps more than we realize. Um, the things that we're doing are so important, but they only happen because of individuals. And so I do think the one thing that I've learned in the last 7 years is, like I've said before, I might be a little bit of a broken record, but you can make a difference. And so that's my other thought. My closing thought is, take the courage and go into your community and help people that need it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking this time. I really appreciated this conversation and look forward to staying connected on some level.
Oh, thank you so much, Matt. Really appreciate it too.